Accurately did Isaiah. He said, "This people pays me lip service, but their heart is far from me. They do me empty reverence, making dogmas out of human precepts." He summoned the crowd and said to them, "Give ear and try to understand. It is not what goes on, it is not what goes into a man's mouth that makes him impure. It is what comes out of his mouth." His disciples approached him and said, "Do you realize the Pharisees were scandalized when they heard your pronouncement?" "Every planting not put down by my heavenly Father will be uprooted," he replied. "Let them go their way. They are blind leaders of the blind. If one blind man leads another, both will end in a pit." Then Peter spoke up to say, "Explain the parable to us. Are you too still incapable of understanding?" he asked. "Do you not see that everything that enters the mouth passes through the stomach and is discharged into the latrine? But what comes out of the mouth originates in the mind. It is things like these that make a man impure. From the mind stem evil designs, murder, adulterous conduct, fornication, stealing, false witness, blasphemy. These are the things that make a man impure. As for eating with unwashed hands, that makes no man impure."
Wow.
Mic drop.
Yeah. That's been like a big sentence right at the end there.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting if you look at this requirement about hand washing, it didn't have anything to do really with sanitation. Just
Yep.
because the regulation was you had to take 2 eggshells worth and put it on your hands and rub them together. So we're not talking about getting your hands clean. It's just a ceremonial thing that they did as symbolic of being pure because of their being part of the part is it being the nation of Israel. Yeah. The Jews. So it's not a hygiene thing. And I also think it's interesting as we look at very often when the Pharisees come to Jesus, they're trying to trap him. And it's
Yes.
so interesting. It's so interesting how he handles all these traps. He just turns them back and asks them questions and shows their own inconsistency back to them. So that's I just think though this whole scene is pretty interesting and pretty typical of what fairly often happens when the Pharisees and sometimes the Sadducees, they send their experts to question him, and Jesus is able to just turn the whole thing back on them.
I love that.
Are we recording?
Yes,
Oh.
I did it while he was speaking. I muted
You're
us.
so good.
Yeah.
Can I share how the Message puts that first part? Because
Yeah.
sometimes the way he phrases it is just helpful. It's just the first couple of verses, but it says, "After that, Pharisees and religion scholars came to Jesus all the way from Jerusalem, criticizing, 'Why do your disciples play fast and loose with the rules?' But Jesus put it right back on them. 'Why do you use your rules to play fast and loose with God's commands?'"
Mhm.
And so,
Mhm.
yeah, it's just what David was just saying, that he's like, what's more important, your rules or what God wants? And your rules can like let you feel okay about doing something opposite to what God's actually asking.
Mhm.
So if the rules are helping you defy God, then are they really good rules? Which is kind of brilliant, really.
It really is. And it's something that I think a lot of leaders of the day today, of modern times today, this week, I don't know, maybe they wear black robes, and make decisions. But the idea that you can bend scripture and tradition of the church to suit your argument, but not actually, be Christ-like in your life is this is why he's angry. Verse 7, hypocrites. Jesus hits a lot of the the greatest hits, or if you're, or however you want to say it, the drinking game, all the things. He calls them hypocrites. He turns their words on themselves. The disciples don't know what's going on. There's a lot of just classic gospel tropes happening here, which is great.
Can I say something?
Yes.
Yeah. The thing is, I noticed in the notes on the bottom of I have an NRSV here, and it says hand washing was a Pharisaic tradition, not stipulated by the Torah. So, and I think that's different than, if we would be reading, Leviticus and some of those other verses on cleanliness and what they had to do. It wasn't stipulated according to this. Now I'm not for sure. The other thing I thought was interesting was when he was reading some of the verses and I was talking, going to the other story about the blind and the heart, what's coming out of the mind. But
Yeah.
the NRSV says the heart.
Heart
Yeah.
and mind as well.
Heart is
Wow.
the mind. And to me, when you hear the mind or the heart is, to me, that's more how you feel, how you really are, and what comes out of the heart is what defiles you, not what comes out of, not what goes in.
Yeah,
Right.
to the stomach.
Mhm.
The Pharisees, they not only believed in following the written law, they had a tradition that was called the oral law, and they practiced and followed that as well. And they expected people that are truly pious to follow this oral law, and a lot of it was also related to behaviors that the priests were to perform before they did rites in the temple, and they transferred these rites and procedures that priests did into the daily lives of people. It put a real burden on people. So yeah.
That's a good point.
David, was that oral law, was that ever documented in any way, or is it just lost to history? I mean, obviously it wasn't written, so how do we know what some of those oral laws were?
I'm not sure where it's documented. I'm almost certain that it is, because the way they, discuss, and when you talk about midrash and all these other things that are probably discussed, but I'm not familiar enough with the ins and outs of the Hebrew religion to point to where that might be. I'm sure it is written down. I'm sure there's some information about that, but I've never really done a research into the specifics of that, Greg.
Okay, thank you.
Shall we move on?
Actually, my thought was
yeah.
that words have power.
Mm.
Words
Yeah.
can hurt more than fists sometimes. So be careful what you say.
Yep.
Exactly. Speaking of words, I forgot, some of us were laughing, but verse 16 and 17, if you didn't realize, that is a euphemism. And it's almost like he said it in the most polite way possible of just saying what kind of stuff is coming out of your mouth.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Hateful stuff. And all the things he lists too. I mean, I would. For someone like me, I get a little nervous when they start doing these little litanies of all the bad things going on in the world that are things we've all done, insulted, lied, had evil thoughts, and some. Hopefully, none of us have murdered. Some of us, adultery happens, sexual sins. What does that mean? You just get a little nervous here. But I think again, for Jesus, all of these things that can affect other people, harm other people, and that's why these are sinful. When you're hurting other creatures, other created beings. I think that's one way that's how I look at it, at least.
Well, and he doesn't say that if these things come out of you, that you're then condemned.
Right.
Forever.
No, exactly.
Just
Yeah.
let's focus on the things that are really hurting people.
Right. Exactly.
Rather than like worrying about how many eggshells of water,
Right.
especially if you didn't have access to water at the time.
And if your hands are washed and all
Let's
that.
stop worrying about all of this.
That's exactly right.
That's just making life hard for everybody, but giving you the feeling that you're somehow pious. Like, let's try to stop fooling yourself that you're doing a good job.
Hypocrisy,
right.
as he said.
You hypocrite.
Well, Greg, I did a quick Google search on the other Greg's question, and
Great.
the oral law of the Pharisees they believed that there was a twofold giving of the law to Moses. One was written, and the other was an oral law. And if you want to find out what that includes, the Mishnah, which goes back to about 200 CE, incorporates the teachings of the Pharisees on Jewish law. So if you do want to do some research on it, yes, it is written down. It's in the Mishnah, and it was probably codified, some century or two after Jesus' time, and written down in what's called the Mishnah, Mishna or Nah. Okay.
Wow.
All right.
Thank you.
I bet there are detailed discussions of the Mishnah happening.
There
Somewhere.
probably are. Yep.
Oh,
As we-
sure. Among the yeshivas, at the yeshivas, yeah, absolutely. They spend a lot of time on the law and on the written law. That's where they spend hours, just hours. We saw a program just the other night about it was actually a silent witness, which is kind of a crime drama, but it happened. There were crimes within the Hasidic community, and they had some pictures of the people and the way they discuss things in the yeshivas. It's just amazing. That is their act of worship. They believe literally is to consider and argue and reason over the law. That's a main part of their worship.
Amazing.
Fascinating.
Amazing. All right, moving right along. Verse 21. I guess we could go to the end, then we'll just take our time dissecting a little bit.
Okay.
Would anyone like to read from their Bible?
Want me to do the message?
Let's do it.
Sure.
21
Okay.
to 39.
From there, Jesus took a trip to Tyre and Sidon. They had hardly arrived when a Canaanite woman came down from the hills and pleaded, "Mercy, Master, Son of David, my daughter is cruelly afflicted by an evil spirit." Jesus ignored her. The disciples came and complained, "Now she's bothering us. Would you please take care of her? She's driving us crazy." Jesus refused, telling them, "I've got my hands full dealing with the lost sheep of Israel." Then the woman came back to Jesus, went to her knees and begged, "Master, help me." He said, "It's not right to take bread out of children's mouth and throw it to the dog." She was quick. "You're right, Master, but beggar dogs do get scraps from the master's table." Jesus gave in. "Oh, woman, your faith is something else. What you want is what you get." Right then, her daughter became well. After Jesus returned, he walked along Lake Galilee and then climbed a mountain and took his place ready to receive visitors. They came, tons of them, bringing along the paraplegic, the blind, the maimed, the mute, all sorts of people in need, and more or less threw them down at Jesus' feet to see what he would do with them. He healed them. When the people saw the mute speaking, the maimed healthy, the paraplegic walking around, the blind looking around, they were astonished and let everyone know that God was blazingly alive among them. But Jesus wasn't finished with them. He called the disciples and said, "I heard for these people. For 3 days now they've been with me, and now they have nothing to eat. I can't send them away without a meal. They'll probably collapse on the road." His disciples said, "But where in this deserted place are you going to dig up enough food for a meal?" Jesus asked, "How much bread do you have?" That was there. Seven loaves, they said, plus a few fish. At that, Jesus directed the people to sit down. He took the 7 loaves and the fish. After giving thanks, he divided it up and gave it to the people. Everyone ate. They had all they wanted. It took 7 large baskets to collect the leftovers. Over 4,000 people ate their fill at that meal. After Jesus sent them away, he climbed in the boat and crossed over to the Magdalene Hills.
Yes, yes, yes. Church of the Loaves and Fishes, I think it's called. Tabgha,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
I knew as soon as you said Lake Galilee, I was like, oh, she knows what she's reading now. I'm gonna pull up a picture for the folks at home too.
The beginning part, the scene between Jesus and the woman whose daughter is afflicted by an evil spirit, just for some insight, the word that's used for dogs there is kunarion, And it's not the standard word just for a big wild dog, but it's also kind of the word for a little dog or a puppy. Not that it cleans it up entirely. You know, still what Jesus said
Right.
sounds pretty harsh to our ears. But yeah, just by way of a little insight of what was going on. And he says kind of a little dog, refers to them as not big wild dogs, but little puppies, and she responds in the same way. So
Absolutely. And it is a hard passage. It's the source of in the Episcopal Church of our Rite One prayer of humble access, which you may remember us saying during Lent. We are not worthy so much as to pick up the crumbs under thy table, but thou art the same Lord who has property, always have mercy. And that's taken from this, and also its version in Mark. And a lot of sermons I've heard, and I think a sermon I once preached, many probably not here, took the stance that that Jesus knows what he has the intention of healing this person. And he's going through this show for the people around him of this being like, oh, I'm not supposed to give food to you. I'm told you're just a dog. You know, it's kind of, he's saying it sarcastically. That's one way to soften it or take it. Or the other way is a little bit of like kind of what we were saying on Sunday with the Genesis binding of Isaac passage, which is maybe this is a true moment, again, as there are many in scripture where God's mind has changed, you know, where Jesus, in this case, his mind has changed. And there are sometimes Jesus too is guilty, as human as he is, he can also, be prejudiced, and because he is a Jewish person and tired and grumpy. Yeah.
Keep it Israel. I can't even.
And hey, you're absolutely right. I didn't even think about that. He's being a little passive aggressive, and he goes, I feel sorry for the crowd that hasn't eaten in 3 days. It's like, passive aggressive much? Are you hungry, Jesus?
Canaanites are coming. He's like, yeah. What do you want me to have to deal with? They have to stop and be like, yeah, if they need to be dealt with, I have to deal with them, even if I am tired.
Yeah.
Right.
and I think this could be another example of something we were alluding to Sunday about this passage, is that sometimes when God seems to be saying something, it's right to question him or say no and say, because I know that's not the way God really is. And that shows your faith to understand that in spite of what your religion or your society, or even in some cases the Bible might be saying, if you truly understand what the character of God is, you can say, no, I know that's not what God's saying. I know that's not the way it is. And that kind of faith is the kind of faith that God might have been recognizing in Abraham, and he's certainly recognizing here. Jesus is certainly recognizing this kind of faith with this woman, in spite of the fact she was just called a dog. Yeah.
It's so true, absolutely. And the other thing about her is, this is, you could also name this passage, and nevertheless she persisted. Into the modern term, right?
Yeah.
And that's the real takeaway here, is it's okay to demand your blessing, I think. On screen, you're looking at a Church of the Loaves and Fishes, which has a more fancier name. This looks like a German one, Bratwurmenrungenskirche. So Barb was saying she was right there, and this is an inside of the church, really high res. It's all mosaic floors. So everything is mosaic, and there's a lot of fish and wine iconography there. And let me show you what I mean by that. So there's kind of a view there. It had a baptismal font. So this is in Tabgha, which is right on the water of the north side of Sea of Galilee. You can almost look down on it from the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
These are all the same areas. So he's kind of zigzagging. And this is what I mean by, hopefully Barbie stopped at the gift shop and got some mosaic plates or stuff. She's like, oh yes, I did.
Now, how old?
Loaves and fishes. I said wine. I meant loaves and fishes. Sorry.
How old are these mosaics from?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I think it's probably early Christian, so
Really?
300, 400 maybe
Wow.
AD. I can't rember. I know I'm looking into the new expert.
Yeah.
Ring a bell? Sometime in early Christianity, they just, this was the purported place to be. That's what a lot of is in the Holy Land is you don't have any eyewitnesses passing down saying this is the exact spot where this happened, but with a mixture of communities kind of attesting, they say this is what it is. So
I'm assuming this is an Orthodox,
no, I think this is actually I think it was Catholic now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
okay. I just wonder because the iconography and things, so,
No,
yes.
yeah, you're right. An Orthodox church tends to have outstanding artwork and all. This is one snuck through to the Western Church. Well, it's really the original church before the split. Yeah. Really cool. So yeah, there's of course a gift shop nearby, and you can buy all kinds of stuff with the loaves and fishes on it, right? But as many of the, we're talking, I guess maybe it's more like 500, 600, 700 AD, but right leading up to Charlemagne, between the emperors Constantine and Charlemagne, it's kind of the two markers of like the glory days of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, little C Catholic, where there's lots of churches being built on sacred property. Yeah.
Yes. And they'd be
Remember-
and then somebody else would come
Right.
in and build a,
The Ottomans would come in, turn it to a
Yeah.
museum, and then they'd lose it. Yes, it's amazing.
On that
All right.
on that first picture with the altar there, what's underneath the table? It looks like a dog.
Yeah, doesn't it look like it? That's a rock.
A rock.
So it's exposed on the ground, and people. It's worn down and dark where people's hands have touched it, but you can go up and touch the rock. And this is just like in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is supposedly where Jesus was crucified. I'm a little more dubious of that. I can't hide it. But it's nevertheless a very sacred place. But they really like building the churches on the actual physical spot, and then they make the church oriented around that physicality too. The other places in Nazareth, where Mary's, if you went to Nazareth,
Yeah, we did.
there's a big church with all the Marys,
Yes.
or the paintings of Mary. Isn't that a cool church? That's sorry, it's just Barbara and I just having a little one-on-one. But that's a church where it's built on the house which is just stone, rocks now, where Mary would have heard from Gabriel that you're going to bear a child. So it's the Church of the Annunciation. So these Byzantine churches they knew what they were doing and just said, well, in 1,000 years, people will be coming here as a pilgrim spot. And they're right. So that's what that rock is the actual spot he would have sat, started multiplying the loaves. Yeah. A great miracle. The feeding of 4,000 it's attested to in some form in all four gospels. So this is one of the miracles that the word got around, that this Jesus guy, we don't know what happened. We don't know if people just backed up some semi trucks and just kind of unloaded fish, or if he had a little something up his sleeve. But we went from 6 loaves or whatever the number is to suddenly everyone was fed. And I have said before, and I've yet to been able to weave this into a sermon properly, but sometimes we'll do these potluck brunches here, and we don't get a lot of the signups, and then we show up and somehow it's always food. It always works. God always provides, even little old us, and making sure we get all the food we need. It's pretty amazing.
So last week we talked about where he fed the 5,000, and afterwards there were 12 baskets left over. And we had talked about my footnote, or someone's footnote had said it could represent all of Israel, the 12 tribes.
Yeah.
And footnote this week with 7 baskets left over. And it doesn't explain why, but it says the number 7 could have represented all of the Gentiles.
Oh.
So in the 2 chapters,
Clever.
there's some symbolism, at least they're suspecting of it, that there's enough for all of Israel. And then the next, where he now is reaching out and healing the Canaanite woman, that now there's also enough for all of the Gentiles. So it's kind of a way of being, there's enough here for everybody.
That's great.
Which I think is kind of the symbolism for she only wants the crumbs from the table. It's like such an image of scarcity, right? And then it's like, you don't have to live in scarcity. There's enough, there's baskets and baskets and baskets of bread, and no one has to live off crumbs, which I think is kind
That's
of a
wonderful.
lovely image.
Really beautiful. I'm scanning my.
It's line 30,
Raymond
57. And it says 7 is a favorite number of the author, here perhaps symbolizing Gentiles.
Aha.
And they reference me to Acts 6:1, but I don't have that memorized. So if anyone knows Acts 6:1, why?
Probably a speech by Peter, but I could be wrong.
Might have to do with why 7 represents the Gentiles.
I just briefly just went down a rabbit hole to something you brought up, which is that I was thinking here, I was like, is this the 4,000, the 5,000? Has the 5,000 happened yet? Because you're right. You would be right if you were kind of like, wait a minute, he fed 4,000, so he fed 5,000 the day before. What's going on here? And is it two different stories that were, or the same story, just kind of retold? And I just can't remember the details on that.
And then we
The,
also talked.
The 7 from Acts 6:1-6 is the number of people that they chose to serve the people for their physical needs, the disseminating the food and clothing and stuff like that of those in need, especially so that the Gentile believers weren't shortchanged, and that the apostles could go ahead and do their work of preaching and making disciples, converting people.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And then we had also talked last week, and I feel like someone looked it up and I can't remember, but David, you were saying that one of these loaves and fishes, there's a little boy who shares first. And did we decide that was from Luke? Is that what we had? I'm kind of
Interesting.
forgetting. But that same shows up other
Wow.
places.
I can look it up. I
It's
can see what I haven't looked at.
Oh, I just thought it was nice, this idea that the first person to share is
Your
a
child.
little one
Yeah.
who usually sees things clearer than grown up.
Yep. That's
That's John. It's in John.
John, oh, thank you.
Well, I can't find any evidence of why there's a second multiplication of loaves, but I just remember vaguely from seminary that was an issue that bothered scholars for a long time.
Well, I guess he heals people in a bunch of places. He
Yeah.
could feed them too.
Mhm.
I
It
think
seems-
it's probably different sources amalgamated together. That,
Right.
just like in John, the cleansing of the temple occurs at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, and then in the synoptics it's at the end. So yeah, I think there are a lot of different oral sources that were combined, and as we've spoken of before, the tendency when Jews combine sources to write scripture of some kind or make accounts, they tend to be inclusive rather than exclusive, and just put them all together, and not try to eliminate any.
Exactly. They let us worry about it 2,000 years later.
It just seems so different with the other one with the 12 baskets and
Yep.
everything. And this one has just 7. It just seemed like it couldn't be from the same time, the same time it was done. There might have been 2 different times that he did do that. We don't know because we weren't there, but
We don't, that's right.
But it's
Nor do
possible.
Barb and I know that because we were also there. Yeah.
I mean, it's possible if he's going out and gathering crowds, it would happen more than once that people didn't have enough to eat.
Yeah.
So just like there were sick people in every town, there might be crowds that lacked,
Mhm.
you couldn't just call a taco truck, right?
Right.
So
Falafel truck, probably.
I'm thinking of all the trucks because I'm hungry.
Yeah.
It's a truck.
The key difference is where these 2 miracles took place. The 5,000 was near Bethsaida, and the 4,000 was on the region of the Gerasenes around the Decapolis. So I'm not sure. There is some belief maybe that the 4,000 refers more to Gentiles being fed, whether it's, even though it's not specifically in the area of the Gentiles, it's not far, and maybe they followed Jesus into the area. But it's hard to say what's going on.
I was thinking about this woman arguing. I've always liked that passage. And then I was thinking too about the woman at the well.
Yes.
And I'm trying to think of other times where people argued with him.
And
I
it's
mean, very
always
bold,
women.
very boldly, and in both cases they're women, and in both cases they're not Israelites, right? Because
Right.
it's a Canaanite
Right,
and
then
the Samaritan.
Very good, yes.
And I'm just, I don't know.
Contrast that with Jesus' arguments with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. He was very, he condemned them, and he was strongly against what they were having to say. He didn't hide it at all. But these discussions with women, and as you said, not even Israeli women, he gradually, was much more accepting and compassionate. Even was won over in this case. So yeah, so it's a real interesting contrast. Yeah.
Even
Well-
to his own disciples, because in the message, when Peter's saying, can you explain this parable to me?
Mhm.
He's saying, are you being willfully stupid? That's how the
Yeah, right, yeah.
And to this woman, he's saying, okay, no, you convinced me. Like, you have a good argument and you have your faith. I don't know. It's just interesting
Oh,
contrast
no, I
to
think
me.
you've hit a good nerve for real. It's for Jesus, it's mostly women. I was thinking, it reminds me too of, there's a story in Acts, I think it's Cornelius saying to Peter, what is to prevent me from being baptized?
Mhm.
And just kind of asks it almost as a rhetorical question, who's a Gentile?
Mhm.
Well, is there anything to prevent me from being baptized? And like these women, I hate to say the phrase the Bible says, but the Bible is saying it's really rewarded in God's eyes or Jesus' eyes when you don't just protest for the sake of protest like the Pharisees, but you protest because you found a flaw in the logic of the Pharisees or the thinking of the predominant system, And so if the person Cornelius is a Roman, I caught it. He's just asking rhetorically, what is to prevent me from being baptized? And Peter's saying nothing. You can be one of us just by virtue of wanting,
Mhm.
I guess
Yeah.
I'm
I think
coming.
I
Sorry.
was just going to say, I'm with Charity. I think this shows Jesus' bias and the gospel's bias to the bottom, to the outcast, and the fact that Jesus' response and his ministry was much more geared towards and receptive to the down and out, the social outcast, than it was to the perfect legalistic religious leaders of the day who were not treated well by Jesus, and their viewpoint where they were exclusive and trying to not exclude
Right.
people kinds is really rejected.
Exactly.
I was just gonna say, I think it's, it keeps going around in my head. And I think it's happening is I'm comparing it to like faith traditions that I've been a part of where women aren't allowed to speak
Yeah.
in church. And I'm just struggling with the people who really like got to argue with Jesus and their arguments were sort of welcomed and saw him really changing how he was acting. In both cases I can think of here are women.
Yeah.
And then to have that kind of, not to criticize Paul, but then to have this turn
Oh, he
into
can
like
take it.
a big rule where like women
Yeah.
don't get to
Mhm.
speak. I don't know. It's just, it's an interesting contradiction to me, I guess, is
That's right.
why it's kind of stuck in there.
That makes me think, Barb, in the women's Bible that you have, is there a blurb, an editor's blurb or note about the Canaanite woman? If not, probably in Mark.
There is, but it's not,
Oh.
it's just about her love for her child.
Oh,
Let me go back. I had it open and then I 16, 15. It just
Well,
says she has no name. The story throws labels at her like the Syrophoenician, which is in Mark, or the Canaanite in Matthew, and dog in Matthew. No
Yeah.
name, no title will get in the way of this woman's all-out desire to find someone who will heal her daughter. Insults mean nothing in the face of a parent on a mission. This woman challenged labels and subverted cultural moms or norms. Because of her tenacity, her daughters found life. What could happen in this world if we loved the way she did? And that's all it was. And that's by Rachel Bachman.
Charles,
And
love-
that really gets to the motive And what he's saying is that the motive of the woman, why she was arguing with Jesus, wasn't to disprove him or anything like that. It was because she needed something. She desperately needed it. And it was, and he recognized that and met her need. The insight that Charity had, contrasting the women with the way men were, and when they disagreed or didn't understand with Jesus, that's really a good insight. I never really thought of that before that way. That's an additional, yeah.
I
What
think
is
there's
up-
something.
Are you being willfully ignorant? Like, I don't get it either. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
Hey, Jackie.
I think there's something to be said too, that it was not about her. It was my daughter, my daughter, my daughter. And I
Right.
think something about a mom on a mission was said.
Well,
I think that steers clear today too. Sometimes for ourselves, sorry, I'm holding a baby. Not here.
Hi, baby.
Sometimes we ourselves go with the flow, but when it comes to our kids, things change.
mhm.
Exactly. And yeah, and
And.
it's great. What else can I say to that? Powerful passage, and unfortunate that she's not named.
Yeah.
And then also, you're if you were making the movie today, you'd go, and then Jesus said, "Why don't you come be a 12 disciple? One of my 12 disciples." But he didn't do that, because he's a prisoner a little bit of his time and place, and you can only have men.
Well, unless Mary
So-
Magdalene was one,
Yes,
Yeah.
which I think.
which I
a lot
think
of
she
people know
was,
about.
and not just her. I think there was a bunch of females who just names were lost to history that were just hanging around because that's that's who Jesus enjoyed company with,
Well, and people.
and they made
who
him
wrote
think.
things down, their own views.
Exactly.
Who knows?
Well, all right. Thanks, everyone. This was a great discussion, and we'll do chapter 16 next week. Woohoo.
Sounds like a plan.
All right.
Take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Have a great week.
Bye.